Welcome to Pam Jammer's Magical Tales. We post new stories every week, so be sure to subscribe, like, and share to stay updated. If you'd like to support the channel, see sequels, vote on upcoming stories, or even request a custom tale, check out my Patreon. Every bit of support helps bring more magical stories to life. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. Fresh Submission Part 1. Chapter 1, The Drive North. Zach had stopped counting how many pine trees he'd passed an hour ago. They flickered past the passenger window in endless lines, so dark against the pale winter sky they almost looked like paper cutouts. Every now and then, the car would hit a patch of rough asphalt, and the jolt would remind him where he was, what he was wearing, and how impossible all of it would have sounded a year ago. Eliza had the radio tuned to some folky public radio station. It was the kind of music that sounded old, like it belonged to another century. She hummed along under her breath, fingers drumming on the steering wheel. He turned his head to look at her, just for a second, because staring too long made his chest tighten in a way he still didn't quite understand. She really was beautiful. Sometimes it hit him so hard it felt like a blow, like waking up somewhere unfamiliar and realizing you'd somehow stumbled into a better life than you deserved. She was out of his league. He'd known it the first time they met. He remembered everything about that night. He'd been sitting alone in the corner of a bar in Madison, pretending to read the beer list on the wall. She walked in wearing a long wool coat and a scarf wrapped tight around her neck. She caught his eye across the room, smiled, and he'd felt something loosen in his chest, like he was exhaling for the first time in months. They talked for hours. She told him her family had come from Austria a few years earlier, that she'd never quite learned to care about pop culture. He'd found it disarming, the way she tilted her head when he mentioned a movie or a band, like she wanted to understand but couldn't pretend to care. She was bossy, even then. He'd liked it more than he wanted to admit. The first time he told her about his fascination with diapers, how he'd started wetting again when he was 10, how his parents had moved him back into his sister's nursery, he'd been sure she'd look at him differently. Maybe she'd try to hide her disgust, or pretend she didn't understand. But she hadn't. She'd listened. Asked quiet questions. And when he finally admitted that sometimes he thought about it, about what it would be like to be cared for that way again, she'd smiled in a way that made him feel seen and wanted and terrified all at once. After that, it had felt inevitable. They bought diapers together. He remembered the surreal combination of shame and giddy relief when she'd put the first one on him, how she'd taped it snug and cupped his cheek, telling him he looked perfect. It should have been the best night of his life. Instead, it was the beginning of his unraveling. His parents called the next day. Another lecture about wasting his potential, about how he was nearly 30 and still floating through life without purpose. His mother's voice tight with disappointment. His father's silence worse than any scolding. Something cracked open in him. He broke up with her 2 days later. Told her it was too much. That he needed to get his life together. That he couldn't be a weirdo who wore diapers. He'd known, even as he said the words, that he was lying. It took a month for him to admit it to himself. Another week to work up the nerve to call her. She made him grovel. She deserved to. When she finally agreed to try again, she was different. Softer in some ways, but also more certain, like she'd decided if he was going to come back, he was going to do it on her terms. He'd agreed. He shifted in his seat, feeling the thick bulk of the diaper between his thighs. The car was warm, but he shivered anyway. They joked about it before they left. "You'll wear one on the drive," she'd said, her tone light. "For me." And he had. There was a garbage bag folded neatly in the back seat so he could get rid of it before they pulled up. He'd made her promise. Outside, the trees thinned. The road curved into a long gravel drive bordered by bare apple trees. At the end of it stood a white farmhouse, its windows glowing gold in the dusk. He pressed his hand to the glass, feeling the cold through his palm. How did I get here? He wasn't sure he could have explained it, even to himself. All he knew was that in this moment, diapered, with a wonderful girlfriend, and so lucky he almost felt sick, he couldn't imagine being anywhere else. Eliza reached over, her fingers brushing the back of his neck. Almost home, she murmured. And the word home did something to him he didn't have language for. Chapter 2, The Welcome. Zach waited until they were halfway up the long gravel drive before he wriggled out of the diaper. The car shuddered over ruts, apple trees sliding past on either side, their bare branches black against the deepening twilight. He kept glancing at the farmhouse ahead, white clapboard, lamplight in every window, while he unfastened the tapes. The diaper made a soft crinkle as he folded it. His hands felt clumsy, guilty. Eliza didn't comment. She just smiled a little as he shoved it into the garbage bag they'd brought for exactly this reason. When he looked up again, he realized they were cresting a small rise. From here, he could see how the land fell away on every side, sloping fields and scrubby woods, the last of the light sliding over frost-browned grass. It was beautiful. It was also isolated. As they pulled closer, he noticed the details. A sagging wooden barn, roof patched with fresh shingles. A small orchard beyond the house, every tree wrapped in protective burlap. A wire-fenced garden, long since gone dormant for winter. A chicken coop tucked near the tree line. A pale shape, a dog, trotting across the yard before disappearing around the porch. The house itself looked like something from a storybook. A wraparound porch. A big brass bell mounted by the door. 2 figures stood waiting at the top of the steps. Eliza parked, killed the engine. For a moment, neither of them moved. She reached over, took his hand. Ready? He wasn't. But he nodded anyway. When he climbed out, the cold hit him in the face, sharp and clean. His breath made little clouds. Eliza tugged him forward, her fingers laced through his. The younger woman on the porch was probably still a teenager. She had the same thick blonde hair as Eliza, pulled back with a blue ribbon, and a round, open face that looked too innocent to be 20. The older woman beside her could have stepped straight out of an old photograph, pale hair sculpted into a thick crown braid, a long homespun dress, an apron faded soft with use. Her eyes were bright and assessing, but her smile was easy. "Zach," Eliza said, squeezing his hand. "This is my mother, Marta. And my little sister, Greta." Marta pulled him straight into a hug. She smelled of flour and wood smoke. "Welcome," she said, her voice warm and accented. "We are so glad you came." Greta hugged him too, quick and earnest, and he caught a faint whiff of something like rosewater. Eliza leaned in. "Greta's 18. Just finishing her last year of homeschool." "Oh," Zach said, feeling awkward and suddenly older than his 30 years. "Nice to meet you." "Come in," Marta urged, already guiding him toward the door. Inside, the warmth was immediate. The entryway was narrow, lined with wooden pegs hung with coats and scarves. The floor was polished wood, softened by old woven rugs. He tried to pull his hand free of Eliza's, but she held on. And then Greta took his other hand. He blinked, surprised, but neither of them seemed to find it strange. They just stood on either side of him, smiling like this was the most natural thing in the world. Marta led them through the house, pointing things out as they went. The sitting room. A big stone fireplace, a long floral sofa, shelves crowded with old books and glass jars. The kitchen. A huge wooden table, candles already lit, something rich and savory simmering on the stove. The sewing room. He barely glimpsed a rocking chair, a basket of yarn. As they passed a narrow hallway, Marta paused. "You should know," she said, her tone softening, "my oldest daughter is not well. She's had difficulties all her life, but lately it has worsened." Eliza's hand tightened around his. "We've made her comfortable," Marta went on. but she sleeps most of the time now. She gestured to a half-open door. Zach looked. The room was dim, lit by a single lamp. A narrow hospital bed sat in the center, surrounded by folded quilts and stacked supplies. For a moment, he thought he was looking at a child. But then his eyes adjusted. It was a grown woman, her face slack in sleep. She was dressed in a pale smocked gown, the blankets pushed back just enough to show the unmistakable bulk of a diaper. Something about it made his stomach twist. Marta eased the door shut again. "We don't expect you to visit her. It's private." "Of course," Zach murmured. They continued the tour, past a narrow staircase, up to a small guest room. "This will be yours," Eliza said, finally letting go of his hand. It was simple, a quilt-covered bed, a small dresser, a window looking out over the orchard. A folded towel sat on the foot of the bed, and beside it, a glass of water. He set his bag down, feeling suddenly hollow. Eliza rested her hand on his back. "Dinner's ready." They returned to the kitchen. The table was already set. Candles flickered against the old plaster walls. Zach paused when he noticed the adult-sized high chair pushed discreetly into the corner. It was polished wood, the tray gleaming like it had been recently cleaned. He opened his mouth to ask, but closed it again when Greta caught his eye and smiled, like it was nothing at all. Marta gestured for him to sit. And as he sank into the chair, he tried not to wonder if anyone had ever been eased into this house with the same bright welcome, and never found their way out again. Chapter 3, Confessions. The kitchen smelled like warm bread and sweet cider. Zach sat at the big farmhouse table, feeling half exposed and half cocooned by the heat and the flickering candlelight. Eliza took the seat to his left. Greta settled in on his right. Across from him, Marta folded her hands and studied him with that serene, watchful gaze. They ate in easy bursts of conversation, about nothing in particular. Greta asked him about Madison, about whether he liked the city. Marta kept refilling his plate, smiling every time he thanked her. At first, it almost felt normal. But eventually, the questions circled back. "So you were together before," Marta said, her voice mild. "Then you parted ways, and now here you are again." Zach shifted in his chair. "Yes," he said softly. "That's right." Marta tilted her head. "But why? You seem so comfortable together." Zach felt Eliza watching him. He tried to swallow the tightness in his throat. He's too embarrassed to say it, Eliza interrupted gently. "So I will." "Eliza," he whispered, heat crawling up his neck. She reached over, took his hand in hers. Greta took his other hand without hesitation, fingers lacing through his. "He told me," Eliza began, "that when he was little, he started wetting the bed again. His parents put him back in diapers. They moved him into his sister's nursery and she got to have his room." Zach closed his eyes. "And ever since then," she continued, "he's never been able to let go of the desire for diapers and soft feminine things. He feels safer, happier, when he's cared for like that." She gave his hand a little squeeze. He finally let himself try it. And afterward, he panicked. Greta's thumbs stroked across his knuckles. Marta nodded slowly. "That's nothing to be ashamed of," she said softly. Zach's breath hitched. Marta glanced at Greta. "Darling, will you fetch him a drink? He looks so nervous." "Of course, Mama." Greta rose and crossed to the sideboard. Zach tried to pull his hand free, but Eliza held tight. Greta returned with a small pottery cup. The liquid inside was cloudy, pale gold. "Here," she murmured, pressing it into his free hand. "It's a family recipe, just herbs. It'll help you relax." He hesitated. But Greta's face was so open, so kind. He took a sip. It was slightly sweet, with a bitter edge he couldn't place. Marta smiled at him as he drank. "You know," she said, her voice almost wistful, When I was a girl in Austria, little boys wore dresses all the time. Especially if they were in diapers. It wasn't unusual. It was just practical. Greta settled back into her seat, her hand reclaiming his. Marta went on, and it's a terrible thing that men can't simply be honest about what comforts them. That the world punishes gentleness. Zach's eyelids fluttered. The warmth in his chest had turned heavy, syrupy. Greta's hand smoothed over his. You don't have to pretend here, she whispered. You don't have to feel ashamed. Marta leaned forward. You know, she murmured, our oldest daughter's diapers would fit you. So would her dresses. You could even sit in her chair. No one here will ever think less of you. He tried to say something, wait, or no, or maybe please, but the words slipped out of reach. The fire seemed to pulse in the corners of his vision. Eliza kissed his temple. Baby is getting sleepy, she murmured. He felt Greta's thumb stroke over his knuckles one last time. Then everything went dark. Chapter 4, Dark Decision. Zach woke in darkness. At first, he thought maybe dawn hadn't come yet. But when he shifted, he felt the rough pressure of something wrapped snug around his head, a thick, hand-knotted hood, the weave tight over his eyes. His breath caught. He inhaled slowly through the two small holes over his nose. Everything smelled faintly of wool and lavender. Warm bodies pressed close to either side of him. One bare leg hooked over his own. An arm draped across his chest, fingers resting over his collarbone. He turned his head fractionally. The hood shifted with him. A noise broke in his throat, wet and choked. The body to his right stirred first. He felt a hand on his chest, the brush of soft hair over his shoulder. Good morning, Greta murmured, her voice thick with sleep. He tried to reply. All that came was a muffled babble. On his other side, Eliza pressed closer, her breath warm against his ear. You're awake, she whispered. He shifted his hips, and felt the unmistakable thick, crinkling bulk of a diaper between his legs. He let out an embarrassed whimper. When he tried to move his arms, nothing happened. Panic licked up his spine. He twisted again, and the motion made something cinch tight across his chest, like invisible hands pulling him closer to himself. Bit by bit, he realized what it was. A shawl, or something like it. Thick cords of cream-colored yarn had been wrapped over his shoulders, crossing down his chest and back in an intricate lattice of knots. Each arm was pulled around his body, ending in a woven mitten that pinned his wrists tight against his own ribs. He was hugging himself so securely he could barely move at all. The macrame held everything snug, like a harness and a swaddle at once. No matter how he shifted or flexed, there was no slack. A thin line of drool slid from his lips, soaking into the edge of the hood. Something smooth was in his mouth, rounded wood, slightly sweet and metallic. A pacifier. He swallowed again, heart hammering. Greta's hand slipped up to cup his cheek, thumb stroking over the edge of the hood. Shh, she said softly. It's all right. He felt her fingers find the edge of the plug. Gently, she eased it free. Air rushed over his wet lips. He tried to form words, but his tongue was clumsy and numb. Greta shifted, guiding his head carefully against her chest. He felt the soft weight of her breast brush his cheek. Some animal part of him tensed. But when she pressed his mouth to her skin, the need to resist flickered and went out. Warmth flooded his tongue, sweet and heavy. He sucked without meaning to. Eliza's arm tightened over his waist, her mouth finding the side of his neck in a slow, unhurried kiss. He whimpered against Greta's breast. The door opened. Footsteps crossed the room, unhurried, deliberate. A moment later, a warm hand settled over his hooded head, palm cupping the crown. There is nothing wrong, Marta's voice said, calm and certain, with wanting to be cared for. With wanting to be soft. With wanting to be our little baby girl. He tried to turn his head, But Greta's soft hands held him still, held him gently but completely. "You don't have to fight this," Marta went on. "Not here. Not with us." Her thumb traced over the place where his temple would be. "You've tried so hard," she murmured. "But some things can't be undone." Eliza kissed the base of his neck. Greta's fingers threaded through his hair. "If you'd like," Marta said, "you can spend your time here exactly as you are. No shame. No pretending." Greta shifted, her hand stroking the back of his head as he nursed. "Just being our baby." His chest hitched. "If that's what you want," Marta continued, her voice soft as a lullaby, "you only have to nod." For a moment, everything went still. Greta's hands slipped away from the back of his head. Eliza's mouth left his throat. Then Greta gently eased her breast from his lips, leaving him cold and abruptly empty. Eliza's arm uncurled from his waist. The sudden absence of their warmth made something sharp and helpless bloom in his chest. He swallowed, trying to find words, but all that came was a needy, broken little moan. He nodded, once, then again, faster. Marta's palm rested over his hooded crown, steadying him. "I thought you'd say that," she whispered. And as the hush settled around him, Zach felt Greta's breast press against his mouth as Eliza's mouth started to explore his body. And in that moment, he was certain that he had made the right decision. Thanks so much for watching today. We hope you enjoyed this week's story and found it relatable, enjoyable, or just a little comforting. Remember, we post new videos every week, so if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. If you found this helpful or know someone who might, don't forget to like the video and share it with your community. Your support means everything and helps us keep creating content just for you. And if you'd like to see sequels, vote on upcoming stories, or even get a custom tale made just for you, check out our Patreon. Every bit of support keeps the magic alive. Until next time, take care and stay true to yourself.